Hi everyone, I'm Lisa and welcome to Lisa's Stamp Studio. I'm going to be using the Bird Banter stamp set today to create some beautiful shading with the Stampin' Blends. I'm going to add some designer series paper and some washi tape to create this adorable card. Stampin' Up's annual sale is coming to a quick close on March 31st. And with a $50 product order, you'll be able to choose any free item from the brochure and the second release of your choice. If you don't already have a Stampin' Up! Demonstrator and you'd like a copy of the current occasions catalog and the current annual catalog, just leave me a comment. I'll be happy to send you complimentary copies. Let's head over to the stamp table and let's get started on today's project. Here's a close-up of the card we're going to be creating today, and I'm looking forward to giving you some tips on the Stampin' Blends. I'm starting with a piece of Pool Party cardstock, and I've already scored it in half at 5.5 inches, and I'm going to go ahead and fold that. I like to use my bone folder to get that nice crisp edge and of course to reinforce that score line. I've also cut a piece of designer series paper. This is from the Tutti-Frutti designer series paper stack, but I want to point out something to you about these designer papers. You'll find that designer series paper stack right here at the bottom of page 29 of the Occasions catalog. You can see that one side definitely has the fruits on it bearing the name of the suite of the products, but the other side has very much a generic pattern allowing you to use it all year round and for lots of different projects. So I'm going to put some adhesive on the back, and because this is a small area, I always like to use my silicone craft sheet. Adhesive will not stick to this, which is going to enable me to keep my work surface nice and clean and sticky free when I'm working on my card. So I'm going to go ahead and add just a little bit of adhesive along the strip here, and you can see that if any falls on my work surface, it's going to fall on the silicone craft sheet. I'm going to align this to my grid paper. By lining it up on the grid, it's going to allow me to make the strip nice and straight. So I'm just going to line it up here, giving myself a small margin for the washi tape that I'm going to add. You can see no matter how hard I try that sometimes, I'm sure you do this too, you have a little bit of paper left over. And I can see it's about 1/16 of an inch, so I'm going to flip that over. And I'm actually going to use the back of that cardstock as a guide to give myself a nice straight edge. I'm going to use some washi tape to border this side of the designer series paper to give it a little bit extra color. This comes from the Basics Pack 3. You'll be able to find all the washi tapes here on page 195 of the catalog. I'm going to use this thin one that has the Pool Party in it, and that's going to coordinate well with what I'm going to do with my birds. I'm actually going to turn my cardstock sideways. I have better luck of getting it straight if I work in this fashion. So I'm going to work right here against the edge, and then I'll press. Now you have two options. You can either turn it over and use your scissors for a nice clean cut, or you can wrap it to the back. If it's long enough, you can wrap it to the back without it curling. I've cut a piece of thick Whisper White cardstock, and I'm going to be using my Memento ink. And I've chosen some images from the Bird Banter stamp set. This is also in the Occasions catalog. Couldn't resist these adorable images and some really fun whimsical greetings. When you're using your Stampin' Blends, it's important that you use thick Whisper White cardstock and that you use Memento ink. This is a water-based ink which will work well with the alcohol-based markers. So I've pulled out the little parakeet, and I'm going to ink him up on the Memento pad. And I'm going to stamp him here near the bottom. That stamp set also includes this balloon, so I'm going to go ahead and ink that up as well. And I'm going to line this up the best I can over his beak so that it appears that he's holding it. I'm going to set that aside for just a second. And while I have my ink pad out, and I'm grabbing the greeting, and this one says, "A little birdie told me it was your birthday." So I'm going to ink that up again in the Memento, and I'm going to stamp that here in the bottom right corner. I want to make sure that I leave sufficient room for that layer. We'll set that aside, and we'll come back here to our image. I'm going to be using the Pool Party Stampin' Blend. So there's a light and a dark, and you can see by the cap, it's pretty evident that this is the light one. I mark my Stampin' Blends with a piece of washi tape to indicate the brush side. I was always fussing with them and having to read and look and to see which side was which, so I find this just saves me a few more minutes. There's little grippers here on the cap that allow you to pull the marker open, and they do lock shut. You'll hear a snap. That'll ensure that the marker stays stays nice and wet so that the alcohol base in here doesn't evaporate. So I'm going to start with my nub end. I like this fine point end because it's going to allow me to get inside these small areas really easily. I'm going to start with small circular motions since this is such a small area. Leaving areas that are white, that are not covered with ink, is totally acceptable. So don't feel like you've got to cover the whole thing. When you have an area that's really narrow, like the tail here, I just go ahead and brush over it. Now that's good. I'm going to go ahead and cap it. There's that snap we talked about. And now I'm going to go over to the darker shade. And you're going to see here that I'm going to add a little bit of dark color where the artist's accent lines are. Those little lines put in there by our concept artists at Stampin' Up! Actually are a cheat method for us to allow us to put a little bit more color in. So you're going to see how I'm kind of brushing in a little color here just to give them a little bit of depth. Then I'll go ahead and I'll cap that. Now I want to add a little bit of gray because I don't know if you've ever noticed around a parakeet's eye, there's a little bit of a gray tone there. So I'm going to use the light Smoky Slate, and I'm going to come in here as well and add just a little bit of gray tone, and then of course I'm going to color in his beak. The great thing about the Stampin' Blends is that they're effortless and they color beautifully. You'll notice with a marker when you go over something that it'll get darker in some areas and not with others, but that's not the case with the Stampin' Blends alcohol markers because it'll evaporate and it'll leave the color image even. I'm going to cap that. Now the secret to the blending is going back to the lightest color. So I'm going to take the cap off of this one, and I'm actually going to go over this, and I'm going to blend because I want those colors to come together and not really look like I have hard lines. So you can see I'm making small circular motions, not doing too much around his eye, just a little bit. And I'm going to show you how to use the color lifter here in a minute as well. I'm going to cap that again. And you can go back and forth as much as you'd like. So I'm going to go back over this again. I'm going to put a little bit of gray in those wings. I want to bring in a little bit of that contour that I had there. Now if you're happy with it, you can leave it, or again, you can blend. This is the color lifter. It really should be called a color mover because that's basically what it does, is it moves the color. I'm going to take the cap off that narrow side, and I'm going to lighten up the area around his face a little bit by putting a little bit of the color lifter here. What's going to happen is as the alcohol begins to evaporate, you're going to see how that area becomes lighter. I'm also going to do the same thing here in the breast area, just to lighten up that area as well. And now I'm going to do the balloon. So I'm going to bring in the Daffodil Delight, and this is the light color, and I'm going to pull off the tip, and I'm going to color in the balloon using those same small circular motions. Switching over to the darker shade of the Daffodil Delight, and this time I'm going to use the brush end. So I'm taking off the cap, and I'm actually going to turn my paper to make this easier for me. I want this side of the balloon to be darker, so I'm actually going to flick color here. It's going to allow me to provide a larger surface of color without doing those small circles that we did before. And then I'll turn this again. Remember to always turn your project and not your hand. It's going to make it a lot easier for you. I'm going to come in here and add a little bit of color as well, and a little bit more at the bottom. And then I'll cap this. And just like before, the magic is going to be in the blending. So I'm going back to the light color, turning that, and then I'm going to flick again. And this is the light color over the dark color. But what it's doing is it's pulling it from the outside in to get that shading. And then I'm going to turn, and I'm going to do the same thing here. Now the other thing about the color lifter that's really nice is if you happen to go a little bit outside the lines, I'm going to show you how to use that. Let's say, for instance, I had a little bit of color here in a place I don't want it. I'm going to go back to the color lifter, and I'm going to use the fine tip side, and I'm actually going to work away from the edge of my balloon because I don't want that alcohol to penetrate my image. And I'm actually going to make small circular motions right outside of it. And what it's going to do is it's going to push the color in. So it's going to eliminate that little mistake that I made. Giving yourself time for that alcohol to process. It takes about 8 to 10 seconds or so. And you're going to see that start to evaporate, that little bit of a wet spot. Now I want to make sure that my bird isn't just floating, so I'm going to come back with my Smoky Slate. I'm going to use the brush end of my marker again. And this time I'm going to add a little color underneath his feet. And you're probably thinking, well, that's really dark. Well, again, we're going to use the color lifter using the broad side. Now I'm going to go back and forth over this to kind of tone this out and lighten up that color. You'll see again, as it processes, it's going to become lighter and not nearly as obtrusive as it was when we first started. Now that we have our image done, I chose to go ahead and mount it on a piece of Whisper White cardstock. This is a very narrow layer, but I'm going to use dimensions just to create a little bit of depth to this. Now, the reason I use thick Whisper White cardstock, and you should as well, is because of this. The Stampin' blends with the alcohol base have a lot of color in them, and it's actually going to bleed through the paper, so always make sure that your work surface is covered. I've got my dimensionals here. I'm going to go ahead and add one in each of my 4 corners. And I'm also going to add one in the center. When our cards go through the mail meter at the post office, they'll come out sagging at the other end if we don't have a little support there for them. So I always try to make sure that I've got them balanced out. If you're having difficulty getting off the paper backing, take your fingernail, press it inside the dimensional. That's going to lift that outside edge. I'm going to place this here, and then I'm going to give myself a very thin border. This is 1/8 of an inch all the way around. And then I'm going to mount this here on the base of my card just using adhesive. So I'll go ahead and I'll border this with some adhesive. Slide this over to that white layer. Center it, and then I'll flip over and rub from the back. I like to rub from the back in case there's ink on my hands, and then I'm going to go ahead and add adhesive again to this layer to mount it to the base of our card. And I'll go ahead and adhere that here. Again, I'm going to flip and rub from the back. It's really a simple card, isn't it? I think the star are those Stampin' blends. They provide a little bit of color here. So here's the card we created together today. The one I created before you joined me. You can see, depending on how you're coloring, no two are going to be exactly alike. If you love to color, I'm going to encourage you to try these Stampin' blends. They are a fabulous product. You can buy them individually or in a color combination, or you can buy the whole set. We also have a ivory and a bronze for flesh tone, as well as that color lifter I showed you today. All the products are available in my online store, and I offer exclusive and generous online rewards. You can find all the details on my blog at lisasstampstudio.com. Thanks so much for joining me, everyone. I look forward to seeing you next time. Have a great day.